in electronics and so forth. We can have people working at home and doing all kinds of things, small businesses, and I think we would all agree that small business drives things more than anything else. I know I was just aghast when I heard that Philip Morris was 11% of the tax base in Cabarrus County, and I thought, well, I hope Stanley never gets in that position. I hope we are building up our small businesses to a point that we never depend upon one particular employer. But certainly, we have water, we have power in this region. If we use it wisely, I think that we can draw a lot of innovative new business.
Joel?
I think we have a lot of unique opportunities that we don't see on the West Coast and we don't see in the Northeast. Certainly, although this may not be popular to say, we have a much lower cost of labor. We have a relatively good infrastructure, as you mentioned, with access to water. Our electricity rates are, for good or bad, very low, and we have some fantastic universities. Naturally, I think that we do have the opportunity to pull a lot of our resources together around some sustainable industries. And, the three we're talking about today is the renewable energy generation, energy efficiency, which, of course, Trane and HVAC manufacturers play into, and transit. Now, which one do we have the best opportunity of winning? I don't know, but I think that we have a lot of the right ingredients to be successful in one or multiple categories. It does come down a little bit to the political will of what sort of regulatory environment we want to create in this state and in this region to make this possible. Because there's no question why 70% of the renewable energy industry is located in California. 70% of the U.S. renewable energy industry is located in California. There is a market there. So, we consume twice as much energy per person as anyone else in the world, almost. So if there should be any energy industry anywhere, it should be where people consume it.
Just one other thing. I think what we are learning, particularly in Charlotte, from the problems we're having with our financial services sector, the one big thing is kind of dangerous for a community, and that if there is any movement, it should be toward broader diversification of our economy. And so I certainly think that green jobs is an emerging industry in our community, but I think that it's still going to take a fairly long time to really form that real base so that it's really counted as a sector of the economy. I still think that financial services will continue to be big in Charlotte. Our bread and butter, whether folks know this, warehousing and distribution still will be pretty big. People still need goods and services, and they're probably still going to travel along our highways and byways. Research and information, and I think another emerging sector is biotechnology. So I think generally those.
John?
I think that's a good segue from what Deborah said is this region grew as a trading path, and I don't think we should ever lose sight of that in logistics and distribution, which still exists and will continue to exist, that'll be a strength of this region. And while we talk about the next big things, which are extremely important, we don't need to lose sight of the things we've been doing well and can continue to do.
Okay, well, Deborah wasn't even here when you talked about diversifying the portfolio, and she got it anyway. So I think that's what the story is all the way through. That discussion is that maybe the next big thing doesn't need to be so big and be many things. So let me go back. Let me just ask another sort of follow-up question to the research effort that's going on in Kannapolis and with Mr. Murdoch's initiative there. By the way, if you haven't gone by to see that, if what you remember are the smokestacks and the Cannon mills, Pilatex, but it's Cannon to me, and drive by there sometime to see how much that has changed just in looks. Doesn't say what's going on in those buildings, but it certainly has changed immensely in a very short period of time in the way things tend to go. So that effort has to be one of the bright lights during this downturn that we're going through. At the same time, those of us in North Mecklenburg, people in Rowan County, people in other parts of Cabarrus County are saying, what are the spinoffs of that? Can that fuel more than just what's on that park? Are the spinoffs going to be able to repopulate the Philip Morris property, for instance? Are they going to, I know people are planning, particularly in South Rowan, around Lanzas, other places there, about what are the spinoffs for us. When we talked about the planning effort for Highway 73 in North Mecklenburg, people were talking about, maybe there will be things that will come here from that research park in Kannapolis. So do you see its reach being like that, or is it going to be much more concentrated, you think? Jonathan, you want to take a shot at that first?
To me, the greatest asset, you talked about the buildings and the transformation in Kannapolis, but to me the greatest asset of that site is the intellectual infrastructure, that you have this combination of private business and the educational facilities. And what that does, and where I think the spinoff really begins, is with the need for continuing that education, increasing that education. So there's a challenge throughout the region for the community colleges or for primary and secondary education to ramp up those education levels to match that new economy. And by doing that and producing those individuals who are trained, it's going to be more than just the research campus that benefits from that. It's going to be the region, and companies, I think, would be attracted here because we've increased those educational assets.
Grace, you want to?
We always talk about great and global and big, and we keep our eye on the star and all of that sort of thing, but sometimes when we do that, we fail to see what's down at our eye level. And in that sense, I'm putting on one of my personal hats as a small business person. We often forget that you already have businesses here that are in need of the support of the local economy. And as you mentioned earlier, small businesses are the economic generator everywhere. And we need, I feel we need as elected officials to look a little closer at what are the needs of the small business owners. Incentives tend to go to the large folks. Tax issues tend to go to the large folks. And rather than looking for a new basket to put all our eggs in, so that in the future maybe that basket gets toppled like it has been toppled recently, maybe we need to do a little better job of nurturing the existing businesses and the businesses, small businesses, that will come with these other larger activities around them and do things to incentivize them as well.
Thanks. Anybody else?
I think if something does occur and the basis for how far-reaching that impact will be, I think will come only through a deliberate action of trying to facilitate it, that it's not just going to happen through osmosis, but someone has to take control, understand what that operation is, understand what types of spin-off economic activity can be derived from it. But I don't think that we can kind of sit back and hope that it's going to occur. I think we've got to take very proactive action and make it occur.
Okay, good. You want to say?
Well, I'm just tempted to add something based on Jonathan's remark about assembling all this brain power. But all of us have had the experience of launching something or engaging some problem and discovering that 2 or 3 of us don't get far. But if we can actually assemble a collection of people who may bring multiple perspectives and have different disciplinary backgrounds and stir this into sort of a civic Cuisinart, where all of the parts get blended together to something that none of us could have done alone. That's in a way the formula that's being set in motion at Kannapolis right now. And it's an innovation at least on 2 fronts. And you can define innovation a lot of ways. Conventionally, it tends to be defined as doing something here that was done elsewhere and it worked there, so it should work here. This is a best practice. But really, basic innovation is doing something that hasn't been done before. And what is nearly never done is coalescing a whole bunch of universities around some grand goal. So this is kind of innovation on more than one front and more than one level here. And Murdoch's generosity and vision is actually inducing people, because of opportunity and because of the presence of money, to commit an unnatural act in the university sector. Actually collaborate, be on the same property, share resources, and by doing that, they're going to interact in ways that are going to produce things that will surprise them and surprise all of us. I just don't think you can possibly overestimate what kind of an impact this may have as a breakthrough.
The real unnatural act may be that local governments work together. Think about where it's located, in Cabarrus, Rowan. We're talking about impacting Stanley, Mecklenburg, and Iredell. So what we really have to see as a result of that is an impact of something big in a region, and how are the local governments going to respond to that, because it's not going to be just infrastructure in and around Kannapolis, but it's going to be throughout the region, and how is that going to work?
Yep. Good point. I want to touch on another topic that was very much a part of this report before we run out of time, and we're rapidly running out of time. So let me ask you a question about growth and growth management, which is another big part of this report, both times. Obviously, Curtis and Neil talk a lot about growth and about how, in many instances, we haven't managed that too well here in this region. One of the things that comes up among people who are in the planning business, and many of us are in this room, is that something that can be done during an economic downturn when the development pressures aren't tremendous is that you can take time to actually plan and begin to talk about, okay, here's what's happened to us in the last 15 years. It will probably happen again after this downturn. Now, what can we do it better the next time around? We've had the example here today, and the example that's going on about Cabarrus County doing a growth boundary through water and sewer extension policy primarily, I think, and through small area plans to say, okay, there's places we're going to grow and there are places we're not going to grow. Grace, you and Jonathan might want to say more about that because we haven't gone into it a lot. Those of you in other jurisdictions, what are you doing in terms of taking this law as a way of doing, of looking at things you might not have? Or if you haven't done that yet, what would be the thing that you would do if you were to do it? So let's talk about it. Joel, I know you're not from a specific jurisdiction, but feel free to put your 2 cents in too, as we go through this. Jonathan, Grace is ready, I see.
I just definitely wanted to share today what Cabarrus County has accomplished here with the partnership of the City of Concord. We had an 8-month moratorium in this county where we studied the growth on the eastern side of the county. The western side of Cabarrus County toward Charlotte has, of course, experienced tremendous urban sprawl. The City of Concord had the concern of providing utilities and water, and the county had the concern of providing school facilities. So because we had a mutual concern, we were able to get together and take 8 months to study this issue. And it wasn't just the staff and the elected officials studying this issue. It began with the people. And there were many meetings, I forget how many, throughout this area that was being affected, where the people came out, discussed what they wanted the future of their part of the county to look like. And from this long study came this central area land use plan. And just very briefly, it does regulate the extension of utilities, what areas utilities will go into, where, how long it will be before we would consider utilities farther out. It also talks about the zoning, the preservation of the agricultural areas and so forth. But I think the success of that came from the fact that this grew out of the people. It was not a top-down mandate, it was a bottom-up request.
That's an important point, I think. Jonathan, you...
Probably 15 years ago now, there was a cooperative agreement between our water and sewer authority locally and Charlotte-Mecklenburg Utilities to run a major sewer line up the Rocky River Basin. And what we, in really to our detriment, what we lacked there was the land use planning that should have taken place prior to that. So in addition to the central area plan, our central land use plan, we're now getting ready to kick off a plan in the town of Harrisburg, cooperatively with the town of Harrisburg, that will precede another regional line being run up the Reedy Creek Basin by the Water and Sewer Authority and CMUD together. So this time I hope that we are getting out front of that by doing this Harrisburg plan. So it's a model, as Commissioner Minot described, that model we intend to replicate throughout the county.
Lindsay, you?
I think it was Dwight D. Eisenhower said that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So we're, in Stanley County, taking this opportunity, hopefully, to get some things put into place. Again, still, I think it's important, though, for people in the region to understand that in Cabarrus County, they've had the experience of dealing with issues on the western end of their county that really did motivate elected officials and staff to look at things on the eastern end of the county. We still haven't experienced that yet. We actually have a declining school enrollment in Stanley County. And I know many of you in the room are going, I can't believe that. I can't remember when we had that last, but we have declining school enrollment. So it's up to, I think, leadership in our county to, again, educate our citizens that things will change and this will come. Collectively, right now, we're looking at going back and revisiting our award-winning land use plan that was put in place about 8 or 10 years ago, and hopefully this time we'll put some real teeth to it. We're working on a Parks and Recreation comprehensive plan across the county as well. We're going back and updating one that was done 10 years ago, and in cooperation with the Carolina Thread Trail, who's helping us with that. We're also, with the help of some state funds, looking at farmland preservation and doing a farmland preservation plan. So to me, it looks like that if we can synergize these efforts, that we'll come out, hopefully in the next year or so, with an excellent guide that may enable us to do some things that'll be good for Stanley County in the long run.
Deborah?
Thank you, Bill. One of the major initiatives that we have undertaken, and it wasn't as a result of kind of a downturn or lull in development activity, it's just something that we needed to do, and that is to relook at something that Neil Pearson and Curtis worked on, our centers, quarters, and wedges framework. It was the basis for our transit system. Centers, quarters, and wedges is really a historical development pattern where our corridors, our major thoroughfares, and other transportation arterials that where we want to focus most of our development. Centers are also another major activity area where we want to focus development. And the areas in between we call wedges, where we are trying to maintain somewhat of a fairly low density development pattern. So what that does is helps us really manage and redirect our growth, higher density development in areas where the infrastructure can support it, because either the infrastructure is currently there now or it is planned from the perspective of transit. So that has been a big initiative that we have undertaken. That's important for us because it is not just a planning document. That is the normal sense of the planning document, that the planners go out and do a plan, and then it sits on a shelf, and one day somebody will pay attention to it when we go through a rezoning. That's not the case. It is the citywide growth framework. Other departments, almost all departments, kind of have operationalized themselves under that growth framework. We have even a growth framework steering team where economic development, Charlotte Department of Transportation, planning, other departments, we meet on a monthly basis to talk about Are we achieving our goals in terms of redirecting growth into those particular geographies in an appropriate manner? Our Comprehensive Transportation Action Plan, its basis was around that growth frameworks. Our utilities department's long-range capital investment program, fundamental basis for it was our centers, cores, and wedges framework. So it is a big document for us. It's not a land use plan. It is a growth framework. And last but not least, we have made a lot of progress on developing smaller area plans, for example, a neighborhood, and integrating it with transportation. That is the land development intensities that are recommended. We also marry them with street and road capacity capabilities. So
Okay.
that's what we're doing.
Joel?
I'd just like to make a comment which is slightly different. I heard Jeff Michaels speak a few months ago at the Charlotte Economic Development Forum with the governor, and I was very impressed with the work that the Urban Institute is doing in terms of getting the counties together and looking at a regional plan instead of just a county plan. The Charlotte Regional Partnership as well has done a fantastic job, and again, pulling together the region's interests instead of looking at it on a county by county or city by city, perspective. In Europe, for 13 years, I watched how specific zones like in Cabarrus County were set aside for conservation, agriculture, and it really works. It creates value in the land that is developable. And I think it's something that unfortunately Mecklenburg County experienced a little bit too late. We grew beyond and sprawled beyond what we were able to conserve. The comments are a little different. When I look at the infrastructure we're going to need to serve the Charlotte region, the power infrastructure again, this is a regional concern. That to generate the power that concentrated cities are going to need, we need the rural areas. Specifically in solar, if you look at Germany, all of the large installation companies are not located in the cities. They're located in counties like Stanley County. They're located in Rowan County and Randolph County. They're located where there is a lot of land. Also, something else that's important is with solar, it doesn't require water. So with all other traditional types of electricity generation, nuclear or coal, they're the biggest consumers of our water that we have. So if you go to a renewable energy where water is not required, again, that means you don't have to be huddled around a precious resource like water. Again, tying this all together, I think that dealing with these issues as a region, especially with electricity, it's going to be an industry that is not only going to benefit the cities, but it's really going to tie us closer together. And large counties like Stanley or the eastern side of Cabarrus County or places where there is land is going to be needed to generate power for the population centers.
Thank you. We've about used up all of our time on this. The 4 minutes is going to come down to one sentence for you. For those of you in the audience, we're getting ready to give you an opportunity to make comment or ask questions. One of the things that you might want to comment on is that, in reference to this last question, if in your jurisdiction or if in your work you know of other of these initiatives that are occurring throughout this region, might be a good time to talk about them. Or alternatively, if you know of something that you'd like for to occur, it'd be a good time to talk about it. Let me just say thanks to the panel. I thought it was interesting and fruitful comments that we had here today. I'm going to give you an opportunity in a couple of sentences to sort of summarize your thoughts. Perhaps you can summarize them around the notion of, if you could say in 2 sentences, what's your vision for the future of this region? How about a shot at that? A quick hitter vision. I don't see anybody leaping at that.
I'll go first. I like what Gandhi said, be the change you seek. I think it starts with us as individuals, And if we have an idea of a sustainable, high quality of life community for ourselves, then we need to be doing whatever it takes to also implement that across the region.
Okay. Deborah, you?
Good is the enemy of great. I think the 2008 report challenges us to be a great region, and that's my vision for this region.
Grace?
My vision would go along with the comments others made about the ring cities. I love Mecklenburg and love Charlotte, go in there all the time, but we need to promote the beautiful ring cities that we have and connect the two with the transit so that we can have the beauty and the shared enjoyment of both types of life.
Joel?
I would like to see renewable energy become the new industry with the capital in Charlotte, at least on the East Coast. We have a unique opportunity right now, and I didn't mention it, but we have a stimulus package where every county and every city that's here today gets a certain amount of money for specific renewable energy and energy efficient projects. If those are done effectively, utilizing North Carolina installers, manufacturers, and suppliers, I think it could give us a good kick in the pants,
Right.
to move forward on these objectives.
Jonathan?
This is a statement I use with the scouts when I'm looking at maps with them. If you don't know where you're going, any road will do. We've got to have assessments like these. We've got to have benchmarks. We've got to stop, see where we are. But then from there, we've got to determine what our goals are, whether that be growth management, sustainability, conservation, whatever that may be. We've got to set those goals, and we've got to set specific actions to get to them.
Good, thank you. For you to ask your questions, you need to come to this mic. And I think this is being taped, so you need to identify yourself and ask your question or make a comment. Brian's going to be first.
In looking at the report, there's a sense of urgency as to what we need to do as a region on some of these issues. But you also mentioned Utilities Commission, for example, their reaction to Duke Power and what they're trying to do. We've also seen, particularly those users of the Catawba in relation to water, while everybody was willing to put in restrictions during the drought, the pricing of water is something that a lot of jurisdictions have had a challenge with, not in this county, but in some of the other counties that are using the Catawba. At the same time, a lot of that comes back to the people that are representing those out there that are making those decisions are not hearing that urgency, perhaps, from their constituents. What can we do to make sure that people understand some of these issues so that they will be pushing those making the decisions for these changes rather than it be a regulatory issue that may come out that creates a lot of discourse among those in our communities? You know, this ought to be one region where you don't have to persuade people that what you counted on yesterday may not be here tomorrow. I mean, there may be more of a feeling of urgency out there among citizens than institutional leaders and elected officials are picking up. If you just ask people, you know, what's your reaction to what's been going on and what are you thinking about, you pick up a pretty steady current of worry and a low level of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty about how this is all going to turn out. Well, that's a pretty pregnant moment that you really ought to be able to use to advance everything that the panel's been talking about here. Somebody ought to figure out how to test whether there is a sentiment of urgency that can be used. It may be there.
Neil, you have anything?
Yeah, yesterday in Rock Hill, Mayor Eccles raised the question of young people and students being connected to what are the real choices on how growth takes place. And it seems to me somehow when you think back to it was kids who pushed everybody into recycling a few years ago, the literacy of young people on this issue, because it quickly translates to lobbying parents, is important to think about. And what are the ways to get today's students, thinking about these issues and the stake it is they think and how their communities ought to be run, and not just thinking that the standard way, all the development they've ever seen is always going to continue, that there are real choices in how a region moves forward.
Anybody on the panel wants to, Joel?
Let me just say that, there's two types of utilities: the publicly owned utilities, which are, not making a profit, and the investor-owned utilities. And there's, you can say positive and negatives about both, but the regulatory environment that we exist in today really determines what we're going to do tomorrow. And I'll state it. Duke is a great example. They have shareholders, which they have to show a revenue and a profit every year. But if they buy renewable energy, they are not allowed to put their profit on top of the energy they buy. In addition, even if they say, fine, we'll accept no profit on that energy, if they go to get their cost recovered by the Utilities Commission, if it is not the cheapest form of power, which is coal, they may not be able to recover their cost. So, until we have a regulatory environment that motivates the utilities to support what we want to do as a citizenship, we're going to be fighting a battle. And it's not that they don't want to do it, but they need to show a profit. I mean, they're not a charity organization. So we need to address that. And I getting people together, we can make a change, but to make quick change, to make things really happen, you've got to change the environment that these companies function in, because they've got to survive too.
Okay. John.
My name's John Highfield. I live in Mecklenburg. I got a comment and some questions as well. I'm wondering what role what role you all think a sense of community or a sense of the region plays. And when I talk about sense of community, I think about everything from the city to a neighborhood. I think they're both communities, and I think it's important to have that, as in small towns. And I think that also plays into green. Like if you have a sense of community, you're very concerned about your community and how it's developing or not developing, or what good or bad decisions are made. Also, I'm very interested in how we can educate and motivate developers and the community, that is public and as well as public and private officials, to act for the long term, which I know was talked about in the report, like the ability to age in place in any house someone may have, because we are all aging, and we are all either are or going to be caregivers, which is not a physical environment issue, but it's very much an issue that increasingly we're gonna have to deal with. Thanks.
Okay. Multiple questions, multiple choice questions.
Yeah, that was quite a multiple question. But I heard in his comments the education piece, and of course I come from that background, and it's extremely important. It's fine to have forums like this, and this is a nice attendance, but somehow we need to learn as how to get this information out to John Q. Public, because he just simply doesn't see his place in this. He goes on his daily life and doesn't quite understand the impact or why he needs to be pushing his elected officials, why he needs to be behind them all the time to make these changes. It's going to take some innovation, I think, and some putting our heads together and saying, well, how do we reach him in a better manner? Unfortunately, our newspapers are under stress and strain, and people aren't reading them as much as they are. We need to be thinking of the new media that's out there. How do we get this information out to the adults? And of course, as you mentioned, the education of the young people, I think, is critical Unfortunately, in Cabarrus County, we spend so much of our funds on just the structure and the seat for the child to sit in that we don't have funds for innovative programs in the schools. So it's going to take some thinking, but I believe we need to reach out to the public as we reached out to them in this land use plan, because if they know and have an opportunity to come together, they do, and they will get behind you if they understand the problem.
What about this sense of community and region that John started out? Is that, in terms of the future of this, is that important?
Bill, I think it is important. I believe we're beginning to see that through things like the Carolina Thread Trail, the development of that particular initiative, but in other ways too. Whenever I go out of the state, when somebody asks me where I'm from, I'm more likely to say Charlotte than I am perhaps Albemarle, because I feel like that they can identify with that. And so, but I think that sense of place, and you've touched on it too, down to the neighborhood is important. And I think that I agree with you, Ms. Minor. I wish that there was a civics class required for driver's licenses or something, so we could get people to understand and value, much like Joel was talking about, placing an appropriate value not only on our gasoline going to $4 a gallon as it did, but on water services and water sewer services and things like that. Because if we don't value them correctly, then we can't begin to understand how to put them in place as far as policy for our local governments. And so, but I do believe that sense of place is very important all the way down to the street level.
I certainly think that sense of community is really important, and I think it dictates not only the quality but the quantity of public discourse around public policy. So I really truly believe that if folks do not own the problem, do not care about their community, that they will not be good participants in the public arena. The age-in-place thing, what I always hear from developers is, we follow the market, Deborah. We do what the market demands, and whatever the market demands, then we'll put that product out there. And so I don't know how valid that is. And sometimes I feel like, well, if we don't provide choices for our citizenry, then how do they know to demand it or not to demand it? So it's kind of a chicken or an egg, John.
Okay. Either of you want to say anything? Okay, Dennis.
I want to pick up on a comment that Grace made earlier about the importance of the ring cities and their place. And make a disclosure, I suspect most of you know, I've lived in uptown Charlotte since before it was fashionable. But I share the bias of the importance of our communities and their individual and distinctive personalities. And it gets back to a question that was asked earlier but not answered, and that is about the political will of the people to support the connectivity tissue, specifically the transit issues. I want to see if I can get you folks to speak to that political will. Is it there? Is it obvious? Is it latent? What would it take to support it? What are your thoughts about the legislation, for example, that's percolating through the General Assembly that came out of the 21st Century Transportation Commission? So I'd love to, but have the emphasis of that being on the flourishing of the smaller communities that will need ultimately connect in a regional transit system.
Lindsay, since no Carter comes to Stanley County.
Well, I've talked to Dennis Rash about this a long time, actually. In North Carolina, we have 100 counties. Half the people live in 15, as I understand it, 15 of those 100 counties. I think it's imperative, and they have the economic growth. I think it's imperative for those people to incentivize the very thing you're talking about. Joel mentioned a few minutes ago that if we're going to have alternative energy, particularly solar, we've got to use land, and Stanley County and Randolph and Rowan County have land. Well, if it's going to benefit the citizens of Mecklenburg, to have solar farms in those counties, how are you going to incentivize those people who own that land to make that happen? And so I think we're long past the time where the people in Charlotte, again, and forgive me for being critical, but for the people in Charlotte say, we got ours. Our cost of living is up there because we have our money. Now we're going to reach out and expect you in those ring cities and those ring counties to give up more so that we can continue to do what we want to do. So you've got to understand that somehow put in place and incentivize these rural counties who need something to say, okay, come along with us and let's develop this. What it is, Dennis, I don't know. I haven't known all this time, but we'll keep working on it.
What about Cabarrus County? What's the prospect
Well, I know the
here?
current Cabarrus County Commission is very much in favor of supporting the light rail initiative. We would love to see an additional sales tax here, of which we would dedicate a portion to put aside for that in this county. And I think I mentioned to you earlier the discussion in the paper today about which of the ways are we going to go. Are we going to go north to Mooresville, or are we going to go to UNCC? My comment is let's go both directions as far as we can go, because they have different needs. And if we're going to have the growth here in the Philip Morris property and the research park, UNCC, we need it up here as well. We probably need it maybe even sooner than Mooresville does. So I think we need to look at that issue, but I know that the current Cabarrus County Commission is very strongly behind that type of growth, which connects us so tremendously well.
Anybody else want to comment? Okay, next. We'll probably get through the next two people with these questions and be ready to go to the next thing. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Bill Smith. I'm with the Building Industry Association, and have one question concerning transportation and another on education. Major corridors are needed in any land use plan, and everything that I've seen so far hasn't actually established major corridors for ingress and egress out of the areas. And it seems like there's a lot of contention or lack of will or something that want us where they're not going to be established to be able to acquire right-of-ways and go ahead and start the process in getting these thoroughfares built, because rail's going to take a while, and if we don't do anything for thoroughfares as far as automobiles and buses, then we really are going to be in a fix. That's one. Two, education. My industry, the construction industry, has for the last 5 years had intensive training for general contractors. AGC, National Home Builders Association, AIA, all have training programs and certification programs and regulatory programs and inspection processes in place for green construction. My question is what are the governmental authorities doing as far as training their personnel to establish guidelines directly that can be implemented tomorrow, if possible, so that green building could go ahead and process instead of going through a long laboratory process of trying to figure out what we want to do and hold the contractor up for years and costing untold amount of money because nobody knows what to do. Again, the general contractors, the suppliers, all have been trained, materials are available, but there's just a lot of question marks on the private sector side as far as what the governmental authorities really want and really are going to tell us we can do. That's where I'm at.
Okay. Who wants to say something about that? Jonathan is easing up to the microphone.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this at the very beginning. I think organizationally, we've got to set an example. We have got to do that green building, that sustainability within our organization in order to both have the experience and lead the way. Sitting right behind you as you're asking that question is our county sustainability manager, and that's not just someone who's sitting out there telling us what to do. He's integrated within the departments, integrated within our general services, so that we as an organization start doing those sustainable activities. We are constructing an office building, or will be constructing an office building very soon that will be designed and achieve LEED standards. So we, again, as an organization, can lead the way and gain that experience before we start asking, not only to ask the private sector to promote it, and also learn how to do that more efficiently and make sure we're effective in reviewing that and not a hindrance to private development.
Grace?
One of the concerns that I have is that you have the producers of the world, the people who create the wealth. That is not government. That is your private sector. And I think the function of government is to support those producers. And sometimes I think you get in the situation where we're not really, the two are not talking to each other enough. And I feel that government sometimes puts in regulations or plans or development codes or whatever without a sufficient dialogue with the very people, the producers, that they are affecting. And I'm taking from Mr. Smith's comment that may be part of the issue here, that there seems to be disjointed situation here where the developers really don't know exactly what to do, when to do, how to do. So maybe we need to open up those dialogues with our business people a little more than we have in the past.
Either one of you gentlemen want to speak about, you have written about the roads and transit thing.
Well, I did hear mention, though, and part of the question was roads and corridors. And I just think it's important to think about having corridors that have sufficient density on them. And not just thinking about long corridors, but thinking about corridors closer to the towns that have density and quality of development as being one way to build stronger communities and a stronger economy in the long run.
Yep.
I'd also like to comment, and when I actually read the 2008 report, had a little bit of concern about, I believe it was in the section on sprawl or expand transit, as though our transportation strategy should be one-dimensional, and it can't be. Because I think that your question derives from if we put all our eggs in transit, and it's going to take us a long time to build these transit lines, what do we do in the meantime? And obviously, transit is only going to capture a certain percentage of trips made anyway. And so I certainly advocate for, and I know Charlotte Department of Transportation also, a multimodal approach that we think about roads. And I know for a long time this community has been a roads-only community. But we've changed our stripe, but we can't go one way or the other. We can't swing the pendulum so far to transit that we totally forget about roads, because in transit or in development areas, we need really good, complete streets. We need streets for pedestrians, or places for pedestrians, and good sidewalks, and good bike trails, and bike paths, and bikeways, and we need transit and busways. We need all of it. That's a lot. Somebody has to pay for it. And I think that's where the disconnect is how do we raise the funding to support the number of things that this community needs? And obviously, one of those options is to tax ourselves. And most of us aren't willing to do that, and nor is a politician.
Neil has something to say.
I think it's true that we beat the transit drum very heavily. It was partly for shock value, and I couldn't agree with you more. The automobile is going to be with us for a long time. It's going to cost more. It's going to be less practical for lots of users, but it will be with us for a long, long time. And we need to think about how it's used and how we integrate all sorts of forms of other ways of getting around. I never saw many people around Charlotte riding bikes, and I don't understand. I've been riding a bike myself to and from work or around Washington for about 40 years, and I just can't understand why so few people ride bikes. It's a great, healthy way to move around. Walking has great value for health and for breathing in the hopefully fresh air. And so I agree that it's a multimodal approach that one needs. We were simply trying to use the transit as a contrast to the total automobile environment that you have.
Rebecca,
Okay.
short question.
Well, it's basically a follow-up to the discussion that's already started, particularly in light of today's Observer article about transit and the cost of the Northeast line versus the North line. And I was really interested in Ms. Minett's comment. And, you know, you all said that we should do a Denver. And my question to you is, do you think it's still possible for us to do a Denver and build multiple lines and meet our road needs? And if so, how would you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it may sound a little flip to you, but it's important to get in touch with your inner audacity. And we can easily appreciate how, given what you have been going through as a region, that, you know, it must feel like what was once on fire is now just a few embers and you're struggling to fan the flames and the temperature has dropped. But that is the best time to reach down and get in touch with that inner audacity again. I would remind you that Denver went through a long fallow period. They had a boom too, and then they had bust, and there was all the hilarity over the see-through buildings in downtown Denver, and all the geologists, you know, suddenly had to open up restaurants, and it wasn't a guaranteed steady trajectory of success there. There was, as many have been talking about on the panel, an outburst of political will. And, you know, an energetic young mayor thought he was taking good measure of the sentiment of people in the region, and he said, imagine a great city, when there really wasn't one, and stuck his neck out. And there's no reason why that can't happen here in a similarly down period. It's the best time to pause and reflect and kind of re-engineer the strategy that you've got. So I realize it's easy for an outsider, you know, to parachute in here and tell you what you ought to do and that you ought to get it done really fast, and then we get on a plane and go away. But, you know, you can't work here for a number of weeks and months as we did more than once without having some affection for the place and some insight into your capacity. I don't have any doubt that you can do this if you just get enough people who are willing to try. End of rant.
Okay, last question, sir.
My name is John Benbow. I'm a pediatrician who has practiced in Cabarrus County for 32 years. Incidentally, I moved here from Denver, and what a great place to live that was, even before the boom. I rode a bicycle in Denver and hardly ever drove my car with a system of greenways and bike trails that Denver had back in the 70s. It was just wonderful. I am here today as a representative of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. I'm on the board of directors and past president of the Federation. I also have served on the Cabarrus County Natural Heritage Survey Committee that was sponsored by the County Commission and the Soil and Water Conservation District. And I did this for a number of years, and our job was to work with Jim Matthews and his organization, HARP, to identify natural heritage sites in Cabarrus County that were worthy of preservation. And it was one of the more frustrating things I've ever done. We identified a lot of neat sites and then saw them developed one by one. We had no mechanism whatsoever to encourage the preservation of those sites. the developers had money, and I'm not opposed to development, but we had no alternative to offer the landowners. When it came time for a developer to put in a bid on the land, we had nothing to offer them. So my question is, what can Cabarrus County do to encourage preservation of open space? We have zoning that allows it, but that's not enough. What can we do to encourage the preservation of open space and natural heritage sites?
Okay, Jonathan.
Well, you asked what a commerce director is, and one of the benefits of being a commerce department, which is all of our land development functions under one house, and that now includes our soil and water conservation, who have direct input into development review and development proposals, so that that part of the development or land use is not forgotten, that they can take that habitat assessment and critical area assessment and interject it into the development process. So the first part is making sure that it's properly identified. But the second is what you said, how can you encourage that? And we have tried all sorts of methods of requiring open space, of incentivizing open space, requiring buffer areas. We've gone through a number of methods to try and get open space preserved with some limited success. So finally, I think what our Soil and Water Conservation Board has proposed may be the most effective way, and that is that they have proposed a direct funding mechanism that would set aside money so that those most critical areas we can go in and purchase, or at least purchase conservation easements from them. And I think that ultimately may be the most effective way to do it.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
It seems to me that you need to really celebrate your natural heritage sites and your points, areas for historic preservation and your open lands and their value. And it seems to me an public inventory process on a regional basis would make a lot of sense, where you would be carefully looking and making a real inventory of the special sites and what they mean, and publicizing the process and doing it on a region-wide basis with obviously participation and activity of the local governments and others involved in the process. Would be a way to identify that part of the natural world and also agricultural lands, which we were discussing, as a public need and purpose on a region-wide basis.
Good point. Any other comment? Well, let's give our panel a hand. Jeff will take you to the end.
And thank you, Bill, for doing a great job of moderating. When I came to the Institute in 2003, I was following in some pretty big footsteps in Bill McCoy, and he has been and continues to be a great friend of the Institute, a great mentor to me and to the rest of the staff of the Institute. So, Bill, we thank you for that. Thank you to all of the panelists. Y'all did an outstanding job, and I thought brought a real diversity of perspectives to many of the things that were written about in the Citistates report. Now, if you'll indulge me for about 5 to 10 minutes, I'll make a few closing remarks. And obviously for us at the Urban Institute, there's a little bit of self-interest here in terms of sharing with you a little bit of the work that we are doing, in particular the work that we're doing that we think is relevant to some of the work that's happening or some of the things that were talked about in the Citistates report. Before I do that, though, I just want to acknowledge this, again, is the third of 3 forums that we hosted. Over 150, I think even upwards of 175 people participated in those 3 forums, which is on par with what we typically draw for one of our regional issues conference. It was a little bit different approach for us. Instead of asking everyone to come to Charlotte, it was important for us to go out into the region. And for those of you from Charlotte who took the effort and the time to drive out here to all of the venues in Gaston County, to York County, and to Cabarrus County, we thank you. But also to those of you who live in this outer ring of the region, thank you for your participation. I previously mentioned the role that the newspapers played and acknowledged Elizabeth Cook from the Salisbury Post, but we also have Terry Coombs, publisher from the Independent Tribune here in Concord and Kannapolis, who was also one of our partners with this. So Terry, we thank you for the role that your paper played. We also were surprised when we established or set forth these forums that we had interest in each location by the local government cable access station to broadcast these. Now, that's who is filming this today. You've seen the cameras around here. I don't know what kind of schedule they will be on in terms of rebroadcasting this, but in all 3 of those counties, York County, Gaston County, and Cabarrus County. If you think this conversation today will be of interest to some of your friends, or if you yourself would like to tune in again, we encourage you to do so. And we're also going to be working to figure out how to do this with vodcast, to rebroadcast it via vodcast on our website at the Urban Institute. Now, what I want to do just for a minute, we've heard a lot about what we need to do as a region and how we might go about it. But I think in all of that, we need some assistance. We need assistance from our local councils of government. We need assistance from other agencies at the federal, state, and local level. But we believe at UNC Charlotte that we also have an important role. It has always been central to our mission as a true regional university here in the greater Charlotte region that we serve this role. In fact, this year celebrates the 40th anniversary of the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute. And over those 40 years, we have done a lot of work around the issue of regional planning, and we will continue to do that. When you came in today, you were given a copy of one of the latest products of our Regional Indicators project, and that is the county profiles of the data that we are gathering on an annual basis. When we first came out with the Regional Indicators project in 2007, it was a huge regional compilation. You had the ability to, if you were patient, to go through there and find out how your county was doing, the specific data relevant to your county. But over the last year, our staff, under the leadership of Vicki Bott, has been working to create county-specific profiles using that indicators data. We will continue to try to make that data in a user-friendly fashion via our website. And over the coming years, you're going to continue to see a number of improvements as we try to make the Regional Indicators project a true benchmarking of our progress on a number of these issues that we've been talking about today. I had the opportunity over the last couple of weeks to go back and reread the 1995 Pierce report as well as the 2008 Citistates report. And it was interesting to see a few of the challenges that they threw into those reports to us at the university. One of which in 1995 said, and this is up here on the screen, UNC Charlotte should open a special center to let citizens use sophisticated computer projection and simulation technology to illustrate choices on how roads will be built, town centers constructed, and residential areas filled out. Now, things move a little slow at the university, but 14 years later, we're truly pleased, and you saw the fruits of some of this work earlier with the satellite imagery growth maps. But we have a new program at the Urban Institute, which is a true collaboration between ourselves, our Center for Applied GIS, and the Charlotte Viz Center in our College of Computing and Informatics. And really what it is it's state money coming to us from Chapel Hill that is allowing us to do this sort of collaboration across disciplines and to do it around the issue of urbanization and growth in North Carolina. In particular, we're using a lot of sophisticated technology to try to better understand that growth and what its impact will be on our communities. Now again, you saw the urban growth model earlier based on the satellite imagery showing the historical conversion of land in the state. And I know this is a little dark to see, but we have been doing a lot of refinement of that model, including adding some economic data into it, transportation data, and even more exciting is some of the hardware that they are providing us, including if you remember during the election and seeing the guys at CNN do the little wizardry with the touch screens. We actually are getting something called a Renaissance situation room at the university that will include a touch table. We can bring planners, citizens groups, others around that table and play around with these maps. But even more importantly, and I know this is hard to see, but this image shows where you can actually take your finger and draw a certain area around the region. And from that, the data we have imported into that part of the region, whether it's economic data, land conversion data, et cetera, these little bar charts or line graphs will pop up and tell you a little bit about that part of the region. These particular graphs are showing the comparison of population growth and conversion of land, just as an example of what we may be able to do with that. Most importantly is the what-if scenarios that this technology is going to allow us to do in partnership with you. We are building the model so that we can indeed look at different scenarios of growth under different types of patterns of growth, whether it be in a more traditional, or at least for this region, traditional suburban style of growth, or in a more compact fashion. Decisions about where you might place infrastructure, such as water and sewer, and really see what the potential impact, based on the historical model, might be going forward. Similarly, it's not just about the environment and about open space, it's also about jobs. And one of the things they're working on with the model right now is to try to understand the impact of new job creation. They're even experimenting. I know this will be of interest to Mike Legg from Kannapolis. This model, if it's effective and we can perfect it, will allow us to look at some things related to the projected growth with the North Carolina Research Campus and what its impact may indeed be on the surrounding region. And then, Mr. Bimbo, I know you were just asking the question about conservation and how do we do a better job of planning for the protection of some of these natural resources. Obviously, there is the work of the nonprofit conservation groups, the role that local governments can play in their policy. But the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission just last year had heard about this RINC work that we were doing and asked us if we could use the urban growth model to help them better understand what different policies by local governments in the Yadkin PD watershed could do in terms of trying to protect some of the special areas. So what we did was we married the high growth, potential high growth areas based on the model, but then also overlaid that with the highest conservation areas as determined by the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program. And what we're now doing, and this is still in its infancy, but we're going to be working with planners in this region, including Cabarrus County, to sit down and see how this model indeed might work in helping them plan for the future protection of those sites. Finally, in the 2008 City-States report, this challenge was issued to us at the university, and it said, might UNC Charlotte, as it develops its regional indicators project, see value in a public engagement dimension? Now, in many ways, the Urban Institute has always been about public engagement. Sure, we do a lot of research there, research that we hope informs public policy decisions, but we have also then taken that research and through forums such as this, through our not regional indicators project, but regional issues forum, but also in the sponsorship of reports and studies like the City-States report, we feel like we have always been in the business of public engagement. But the world's changing around us in terms of how people access information, how they want to engage in discussions about the issues that they're facing. And we believe that the Urban Institute can do a better job in using the web to foster and facilitate that conversation around some of these public policy issues. We're not sure yet what that will look like. We are looking at a number of models. There is an initiative up around Philadelphia called Plan Philly that we're intrigued by what they're doing in this regard. We've always admired the Boston Indicators Project. It has served as a model for us with our own Indicators Project, and we think they've been quite effective in using the web to convey and communicate that information. But then there are other initiatives as well. There's one in Central Virginia called the Piedmont Environmental Council, which is a little more narrowly focused on the environment than we are at the Institute, and perhaps is more of an advocacy group than we are, but nonetheless, we think does a great job of helping that region understand some of the key issues that are taking place on a county-by-county basis. So we're exploring that as part of our 40th anniversary look at ourselves. We look forward to continuing these conversations with you, with our other institutional partners like the COGS and Charlotte Regional Partnership, but we thank you for coming today. Don't forget, Vicki is holding up the little, you wouldn't really call it evaluation, but the opportunity for you to respond, particularly if you did not get a chance to speak publicly at the microphone. And please give those to one of our staff members as you're heading out the door. Thank you. Drive safely. Neil and Curtis, thank you so much. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.